I love my Pentax digital spot meter. It's hands down the best meter of its type. But it's big, expensive, and it's not made anymore. If only there was a new spot meter that is just as easy to use. So the Pentax digital spot meter is arguably the best light meter in the world for anything that is not studio or flash photography. I do believe that an incident light meter is probably better in those situations, but for everything else, hands down for outdoor stuff, it's the best. And once you understand how to use it and just how simple exposure actually is, it's very easy to get perfect bang on exposures unless you misread the meter and shoot at 1/15th of a second instead of 15 seconds and waste two valuable sheets of 4x5 Pro Via 100F. Not speaking from experience at all on that. So if I have the perfect light meter, why would I buy this? The Reveni Labs Spot Meter 2. So the idea of buying a new spot meter came from my Japan trip in 2022, where I brought a Fuji GW693 and the Pentax spot meter, which handled shots amazingly well. But it was a little bit unwieldy when traveling, you know. That Pentax meter takes up quite a chunk of space in your bag when you're walking around, and it has a good bit of heft to it for something like a light meter. So having a smaller meter would be really nice for traveling, and with my Japan 2024 trip coming up, I actually ordered one to my friend's gaff. Happened to live in Canada at the time, and we were both traveling to Tokyo at the same time, so I was able to meet up with him to collect the meter to save a few bob on postage. After meeting him, I unpacked my shiny new meter and learned how to use it on the Shinkansen to Yamagata. Yeah, I have no idea what happened to this picture. I think the Pro 160 NS I have in the freezer is cooked and gave me this wild color cast. Although the negative appears to be fine, so it's probably a skill issue. As you can see, compared to the Pentax, the Reveni Labs Spot meter is a lot smaller with a few buttons on the top. The front button being the power sample button for taking a reading, and next one down is the compare/menu button. I'll get to the comparing function later. And the last two buttons are the port and starboard arrows for selecting options in the menu. On the bottom there is space for two AAA batteries, which is a difference from the Mark I version of this meter, which used two LR44 batteries. In fact, there was a AAA add-on pack for the Mark 1, but the Mark II version just built this in, which is really nice because AAA batteries are a lot easier to get, and also you can get rechargeable AAA batteries as well. On the front of the meter we have our light sensor, and on the back we have the eyepiece with a little small OLED information display inside the meter that you view. And that is where we get to the really interesting thing about this meter, is that there is no optical path from the light sensor to the eyepiece. So then how do you aim it to take a spot meter reading if you can't see through it like the Pentax meter can? Well, that's what's really interesting about this meter. It uses an occluded optic. And this is where you look through the meter with both eyes open, and it uses your binocular vision to overlay the display on what you can see using our brain's ability to merge the view from each eye. When you look through the meter with both eyes open, it looks something like this. You can actually see this effect by just covering up one eye with your hand, and then it seems like you can see through your hand with your other eye. So I can see all the stuff over here that my hand is clearly covering up, because if I shut my left eye, I can't see anything. But I can see everything over here from the perspective of this eye, even though my hand is blocking it. That is effectively how this light meter works. This eye is able to see the scene, this eye can see the meter, and then the vision just gets combined. So I can just aim it around and take readings from around my scene. It's a really cool use of this effect. So to activate the meter and turn it on, you just press the power button once, and it gives a prompt then to take a reading with the same button. To change settings like the ISO, etc., you tap on the menu button, and then you can click through the different options of the menu by pressing the button multiple times, and then each option is changed using the arrow buttons. This is also where you want to set if you're using aperture or shutter priority, and then once you've selected whether you want aperture or shutter priority in your ISO and your settings, you then use the arrow buttons when you're on the main screen to select which aperture you want to shoot at. Because let's be honest, when you're using a spot meter, nobody's going to be using shutter priority mode. Now, before I talk about the metering mode that I use with this meter, I need to mention that for myself, I use Nick Carver's precision metering method from his course on metering, and I'm going to be honest, I'm going to have to gush a little bit on this, skip to the next chapter if you want. Back in 2020, I bought Nick Carver's course on light metering, and it has been, hands down, one of the best investments I have made in photography ever. It is easily worth more than any gear you could buy. It is that good of a course. My hit rate for getting my exposures where I wanted them, I would say went from 50% to 95% within a week. This course has easily paid for itself in the cost of wasted film, like no joke. And the biggest thing this course did was it took all the random bits of knowledge floating around in my head from YouTube videos and articles, and it just collapsed it into a single knowledge framework. I actually had a moment halfway into the video on what correct exposure is, where all of the information I had on metering just snapped into an understanding. And this snap of understanding that I had is actually something I live for. Learning new things and having it kind of just align into a knowledge graph in my head is just the best feeling. Like when I finally understood how a differential works in a car, or how dependency injection and testing works properly in software engineering. I have very clear memories of sitting at my desk in the office and just having this blast of understanding, and suddenly I knew exactly what I needed to do and how to build these things. And after this kind of snap of understanding, for the rest of the course, I was pretty much able to guess what the rest of the points were going to be based on the title of the content. But of course I watched the rest of the course because there's lots of great information in there, and because of Nick Carver's voice caressing my cochlea. Anyway, enough about the course. So compared to the Pentax, the Reveni Labs meter is a lot smaller and lighter, but it's also as easy to use, which is the big reason why I bought it. When it comes to the Pentax meter, it's super simple to use. Just take a reading, get your EV value, set it on your scale where you want it to be, read your settings from the meter, and shoot. There is actually a little bit more to it than that, but I can't say any more without giving away too much material from Nick's course. But the really big benefit of this style of metering is that there's no complex delta reading or averaging like the Sekonic meters. It's just not needed. The Pentax is read, scale, shoot, done. So if I wanted a new light meter, it had to be as simple as this to use. And that's why the Reveni Labs meter is great. It does have a bunch of modes for averaging and a straight spot meter for middle grey and a zone system. But I've never touched any of them because I used the PMM mode that Reveni Labs developed with Nick Carver to make the precision metering method as simple as possible to use on this. And it is. It's just turn on the meter, take a reading, set it on the scale, hold the compare button down to make sure the other tones in the image are where you want them and your highlights aren't going into orbit, unless you want them to. And then I can just read the settings off the screen and put them into the camera. It's as easy as the Pentax, which is not something you can say for a lot of meters. But a lot of people don't use spot meters in that way, and that's where the other metering modes come into. But obviously, as I said, I don't use them, so I can't speak to them. And if you don't know how to use a spot meter, maybe you should probably learn that first before picking up one of these. And I just happen to know of a good course on spot metering. Now, when I was on my Japan trip, I shot a lot of 645 slides with this meter and they came out absolutely perfectly. Well, apart from the ones where I forgot to close the shutter and wound the film with the shutter open, but that's not exactly the meter's fault, is it? As for the build quality, the meter is mostly 3D printed, but from my experience with 3D printing, it's a very high quality printing, not the typical kind of low quality 3D printing you would expect. There is a sun shield over the eyepiece, which protects the little OLED screen inside from the sun being focused on it and creating a hotspot and damaging the screen. And it also protects the optics in the eyepiece itself. Also, this meter is not waterproof, but I have used it in light rain and some snow without issue, but I would not really recommend doing that, nor would I recommend dropping it. Now, one thing that's nice about this being a product that is still available is that there are replacement parts. You can get the new battery cover if you need to, and I'm assuming you can get other parts like the sun shield. Also, in the battery compartment, there is a USB port to update the firmware on the meter if needed. And lastly, Reveni Labs actually also offers repair and servicing of the meter if something really bad happens to it, which is kind of awesome. So after all of that gushing, I have to say that this meter is nearly perfect, but there's always room for improvement. First, the aiming reticle, when you're holding it up to your eye, is not as tight as the Pentax's one. I actually rely on the outer circle framing and not the inner circle to make sure it's reading the right tones, and it's not really an issue with the meter, it's just kind of something to keep in mind when you're using it. Lastly, on the next version of this meter, I would love to have a second screen on the top here, so you can actually read the settings off of the meter without needing to raise it to your eye, just like the Pentax meter has its settings on the top. So that would be kind of sweet. And that's all I've got for issues and improvements I would make to this meter. And let's be honest, these are kind of minor things, to the point where I'm nitpicking the most nitpicky of nitpicks. So the Reveni Labs Spot meter is a great product. It works perfectly as a spot meter while being simple and easy to use without a bunch of silly bells and whistles that make the process too complex. It just works. And that's it for this video. See you next time. The Reveni Labs Spot meter. Wait a minute, something's not right. Why have I two Reveni Lab meters? Okay, so I just read off the wrong bloody script. For some reason I have two copies of the script, a new and an old version. I don't know why. Okay, let's try that with the right script this time.
A Daisy. The Isis. The Toyota Isis.